Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental, maybe even a bit unsettling about biology. It's this core idea. The very things that keep us alive, our biological defenses, are often the exact same things that make us incredibly sick.
Yeah, it's a profound paradox, isn't it? The mechanisms designed for protection are inherently double-edged swords.
So our mission today is to really dig into that, the evolutionary design of these defenses. We want to understand not just how we fight off threats, but crucially, why that fight comes with such enormous costs and
Right.
vulnerabilities.
And the sources we're drawing on, they come from a pretty deep set of lectures combining evolutionary biology with physiology. It gives us this, well, almost cold framework for understanding health and disease. It forces you to see that disease often isn't just a system failing. Sometimes it's the unavoidable cost of a system doing exactly what evolution designed it to do, prioritize survival and getting genes into the next generation, often at the expense of, well, feeling good or living a long, comfortable life.
We have to distinguish failure from cost. That's key. Okay, so to get everyone on the same page, let's start with some basic terms. Our sources really hammer home the difference between three concepts: homeostasis, maintenance, and defense. They sound similar, but they're distinct, right?
Very distinct, yeah. Homeostasis is, the baseline stability, keeping your core temperature right, your blood
Yeah.
sugar stable, pH levels, all those key variables. It's managed mostly by negative feedback loops. If something goes up, a signal brings it back down. Predictable.
Like a thermostat keeping the room temperature steady.
Exactly like that. It's about managing the normal, minor fluctuations to keep the internal environment optimal.
Okay, so if homeostasis is the constant regulation, what's maintenance?
And maintenance is. It's about dealing with the inevitable wear and tear. Just by living, by doing normal physiological stuff, cells produce waste, proteins get damaged, things break down a bit. Maintenance is the system's ongoing cleanup and repair crew for these sort of non-specific byproducts of just being.
Got it. General upkeep. So defense is where things get serious.
That's right. Defense kicks in when there's a specific hostile threat from the environment. Think a virus, a serious injury, maybe sudden starvation, something that completely overwhelms the normal capacity of homeostasis. Defense mechanisms are specialized, often aggressive responses to these big external perturbations.
Okay, let's try to make that concrete. The
Yeah.
sources use a protein example, right? How does that play out?
Yeah, that's a good one. So homeostasis for a protein would be just regulating its concentration, the normal cycle of making and breaking it down.
Standard operating procedure.
Right. Maintenance then would be finding and getting rid of proteins that got damaged or misfolded just through normal cellular life, fixing the little errors.
But then a virus attacks the cell, that's the external threat.
Exactly. Now defense activates. The innate immune system flags that virus, recognizes it as hostile, and triggers a defensive response. And here's the crucial link, the costly part. The defense often works by sacrificing homeostasis. Well, to fight the virus, the cell might just shut down all protein synthesis. That stops the virus from replicating using the cell's machinery, and it saves energy for the fight. It's a drastic but effective defensive move.
But stopping all protein making creates a new problem, doesn't it? Suddenly you're not replacing proteins needed for normal function and maybe damaged ones pile up.
Precisely. The act of defense itself, shutting down synthesis, creates collateral damage. It increases the load of damaged stuff that the maintenance system now has to deal with.
So the defense causes secondary problems.
Yes, and this is where you see the concepts of resistance and tolerance emerge. The shutdown of protein synthesis to stop the virus, that's resistance. You're actively fighting the pathogen.
Okay.
But the mechanisms, like maintenance, that then have to cope with the damaged proteins caused by that shutdown or manage the inflammation the fight causes that contributes to tolerance. Tolerance is about minimizing the harm caused by the infection or even the harm caused by the fight itself.
So they're intertwined. You can't really have one without thinking about the other. Homeostasis, maintenance, defense, they're all built from the same underlying machinery, and they share its vulnerability.
Deeply intertwined. And that sharing of machinery and vulnerability is key to everything that follows.
Okay, that brings us right into the evolutionary trade-offs. It's a tough pill to swallow, maybe, but evolution doesn't prioritize our comfort. It tolerates huge costs, massive vulnerabilities.
If those costly defenses give even a slight edge in surviving long enough to reproduce, that's the bottom line. If a painful, damaging defense helps get genes passed on, evolution selects for it.
Which is why, as the sources point out, almost every single defense mechanism we have is linked to some kind of disease.
Exactly. Evolution's not designing for a pain-free life. It's designing for gene propagation. So from an individual patient's perspective, it can seem like terrible engineering.
The sources bring in Randy Ness's cost equation here, which is really illuminating. The total fitness cost isn't just the damage from the threat itself, the cost of the insult. It's that, plus the cost of the defense.
Right, and this leads to that really counterintuitive idea.
But the best defense isn't necessarily the strongest one.
Precisely. The optimal level of defense, evolutionarily speaking, is the one that minimizes the total cost insult plus defense. And sometimes, minimizing that total means accepting some level of insult, because mounting a massive defense would actually be more costly overall.
So let me get this straight. It might be better, in evolutionary terms, to let the pathogen do a bit more damage if the defense itself is incredibly expensive or causes a lot of collateral damage.
Yes, think about it. If fighting off a minor cold meant triggering a response that damages your lungs severely, evolution might favor a less aggressive response, even if it means you feel sick longer. The total cost might be lower with the weaker defense.
Wow, okay. That reframes how you think about getting sick.
It really does. And these costs, they break down into different types. There are the evolutionary costs, the classic trade-off. Energy and resources put into defense can't be used for, say, growth or making babies.
Makes sense. Then the maintenance costs.
Those are the upkeep costs. Building and maintaining the defensive structures, like having thick skin or a complex lymphatic system or producing baseline levels of immune cells. These cost resources, even when you're not actively fighting anything.
Always running in the background.
Then you have deployment costs. That's the energy burn and the physiological disruption when a defense is actually activated. Think of a fever, huge caloric cost, or how your digestion just shuts down when you're really sick. That's a deployment cost.
And the last one sounds the worst. Collateral damage.
Yeah, that's the self-inflicted harm. Inflammation is the big one here. It's crucial for fighting infection and repair, but it's inherently destructive to surrounding healthy tissues. Sometimes the friendly fire from our own defenses is the main cause of pathology.
Okay, so this whole cost structure, maintenance, deployment, damage, dictates whether a defense is always on or only used when needed. Constitutive versus inducible.
Exactly. Constitutive defenses are the ones running all the time. Think of your skin barrier or stomach acid or certain antimicrobial peptides that are always present at low levels. They're generally lower cost, less damaging, so they don't force a major trade-off with growth or reproduction in the moment. They're the standing army.
But the big guns, the expensive ones, they have to be inducible.
Absolutely. Inducible defenses, like launching a full-scale inflammatory response or activating the adaptive immune system, these are incredibly costly. The energy drain, the potential for collateral damage, the disruption to normal function. It's just too much to have them running constantly, so they're kept in reserve, only deployed when a serious threat is detected.
And that's where the starkest trade-off happens. Turning on inducible defenses means turning off other things.
Yes. Activating major defenses often involves actively suppressing growth, reproduction, sometimes even basic metabolism for non-essential tissues. The body literally puts its long-term projects on hold to survive the immediate crisis.
Which circles back to that conflict you mentioned earlier. Evolution finds these costs acceptable for gene propagation.
But for us, as individuals living now, especially in modern environments with different pressures, these costs can feel completely unacceptable. The suffering is real. Evolution didn't design us for happiness or comfort.
And that helps explain things like late-life diseases, doesn't it? Genes that gave our ancestors an edge in surviving youth and reproducing might have downsides that only show up decades later, long after evolution's warranty period, so to speak.
Precisely. Genes with antagonistic pleiotropy, beneficial early, detrimental later. Evolution strongly selects for the early benefit, even if there's a late-life cost, because reproduction is usually earlier. Our modern longevity means we're living long enough to pay those deferred costs.
Okay, so defenses are costly trade-offs. Now let's look at how some specific non-immune defenses work, building on that idea that they're often just homeostatic systems pushed into overdrive.
Yeah, that's a really powerful way to see it. They aren't totally separate systems. They're modifications, exaggerations of processes that are always running quietly in the background. When homeostasis can't cope, the system shifts gear into a more aggressive, prioritized defense mode.
Let's start with fasting, the starvation defense.
Okay, so normal homeostasis is managing blood sugar between meals, right? Storing energy as glycogen or fat after eating, then making new glucose, gluconeogenesis, when levels drop before the next meal. That's routine.
Standard stuff.
But during prolonged fasting, a real lack of food, the defense kicks in. The liver dramatically ramps up production of ketone bodies. These become an alternative fuel, especially for the brain and other tissues, conserving the precious glucose that's left.
The body switches fuel sources to protect the brain.
Exactly. And in extreme starvation, it gets even more drastic. The body starts breaking down skeletal muscle, literally sacrificing structural tissue to convert that protein into fuel. But critically, resource allocation becomes fiercely prioritized. Glucose uptake in the brain isn't dependent on insulin like in many other tissues. The brain gets first dibs on whatever glucose is available.
Command center first.
Huh.
Makes evolutionary sense.
Total sense for survival. And you see the same kind of prioritization with dehydration.
Right, managing blood volume.
Normally, your kidneys and cardiovascular system are constantly tweaking things, using hormones like angiotensin, aldosterone to hold onto sodium, and vasopressin to hold onto water. That's homeostasis.
Line tuning.
But face severe dehydration or blood loss. Defense mode, heart rate jacks up, blood vessels constrict to maintain pressure, and the kidneys go into absolute maximum water and salt reabsorption mode.
Leading to really concentrated urine.
Super concentrated. The sources give that great comparison.
Yeah.
Humans can concentrate urine to about 4 times the osmolarity of plasma. That's our limit. But the Australian hopping mouse evolved for desert life. It can manage a ratio of 26, 6 times better than us. It just shows how intensely environmental pressure shapes the limits of these defensive systems.
Wow. Okay, temperature, cold and heat defenses.
Same principle. Core temperature needs to be stable. Get too cold and the defense activates shivering, which generates heat through muscle contraction. But also, crucially, activating brown and beige fat non-shivering thermogenesis.
And you mentioned something specific about brown fat in babies.
Yeah, fascinating detail. In infants, brown fat is strategically located near the major arteries, supplying blood to the brain and other vital organs. It acts like a dedicated local heater, keeping those critical areas warm even if the rest of the body is chilling. Targeted defense.
And heat.
The opposite. Ramp up blood flow to the skin to radiate heat away, activate sweat glands maximally. Again, it's the homeostatic cooling systems cranked up to 11.
What about low oxygen, hypoxia?
Again, prioritization is key. Brain cells and heart muscle cells are incredibly sensitive to oxygen lack because they rely so heavily on aerobic metabolism. So the short-term defense. Hyperventilate to pull in more air and shunt oxygenated blood preferentially to the brain and heart.
And longer term, like moving to altitude?
The kidneys sense the chronic low oxygen and start pumping out more erythropoietin, or EPO. That hormone tells the bone marrow to make more red blood cells, increasing the blood's oxygen-carrying capacity over days and weeks. A slower but powerful adaptive defense.
Okay, now pain. We think of it as purely bad, but the sources frame it as a vital defense.
Well, absolutely vital. Think about people born with congenital analgesia. They literally can't feel pain. It sounds like a superpower, but it's incredibly dangerous. They get severe injuries without noticing, bite off parts of their tongues, get infections. It's often lethal without extreme care. Pain is the essential warning system. Stop doing that. It's causing damage.
But there's more than just the ouch pain, right? There's that other kind.
Yeah, the sources distinguish acute pain from what you might call homeostatic pain. Acute pain is the immediate signal of tissue damage. But these other pain receptors, the C fiber nociceptors, seem to act more like monitors of the local tissue environment, sensing things like pH changes, temperature extremes, buildup of metabolic waste products that signal something's wrong at a subtler level.
So chronic pain might be that system stuck on.
That's one way to think about it, yeah. The warning signal persists long after the initial injury, or maybe it's being triggered by ongoing low-level disruption, an exaggerated, persistent defense signal.
It really puts suffering in a different light, doesn't it? That inability to feel pain being lethal.
It underscores how crucial feedback is, even negative feedback. And maybe the most dramatic feedback system is the fight-or-flight response.
The ultimate emergency button.
Right. Pure, exaggerated sympathetic nervous system control. It floods the body with resources needed for immediate, intense physical action: glucose, oxygen. And critically, it slams the brakes on everything else. Digestion, stopped. Growth, stopped. Reproductive functions, stopped. All non-essential long-term investments are paused to pour everything into surviving the next few seconds or minutes.
A total system override.
Complete override. And finally, tissue repair and clotting. Still defenses, definitely. Tissue repair is essentially an accelerated, enhanced version of the normal tissue renewal that's always happening. Injury triggers a surge in stem cell activity and, importantly, inflammation, which is necessary to clear debris and coordinate the repair.
Inflammation as part of the solution, not just the problem.
Often, yes.
Mhm.
And clotting is the emergency defense against bleeding out. It builds on the basic mechanisms of hemostasis, but for a major wound, it needs to be incredibly fast and massive.
Which requires positive feedback, making the response amplify itself.
Exactly. The clotting cascade uses positive feedback loops. One activated factor activates many more to generate that rapid, overwhelming response needed to plug a leak now. Speed is paramount for survival.
But positive feedback sounds inherently risky, like it could get out of control.
And that is precisely the vulnerability. That need for speed and amplification, achieved through positive feedback, is the design feature that makes these systems susceptible to catastrophic runaway failures. Which brings us neatly to the diseases of exaggerated defense.
Right. So we need defenses to be fast, powerful, amplified. But that very design creates the potential for disaster when the controls fail.
It's the inherent danger of amplification. Like microphone feedback, a small signal gets amplified, feeds back, gets amplified more, until it's an uncontrollable squeal. Biological systems designed for rapid, massive responses face the same risk. When the off switches fail, or the amplification goes too far, the defense itself becomes the threat.
And this seems most obvious with the immune system. You get autoimmunity, allergies, asthma. But the sources mention septic shock and anaphylaxis as the ultimate examples of runaway positive feedback.
They really are. Septic shock. It's a terrifying illustration. An initial infection triggers inflammation. Normally, this is localized. But in sepsis, the inflammatory signals spread, triggering massive system-wide vasodilation and leaky blood vessels. The positive feedback loops, inflammation causing damage, damage causing more inflammation, spiral out of control.
And the whole system collapses.
The circulatory system basically collapses. Blood pressure plummets. Organs don't get oxygen. The sources use that analogy of a continental power grid failing one part goes down, overloading the next, leading to a rapid cascading shutdown. It's the defense amplification gone fatally wrong.
And the same principle applies to blood clotting, leading to thrombosis.
Exactly the same principle. The clotting cascade needs speed via amplification to stop bleeding. But if that amplification isn't tightly controlled, or if it's triggered inappropriately, say, by chronic inflammation damaging blood vessel linings, you get unwanted clots forming, thrombosis,
Which can break off and travel?
leading to embolism, blocking blood flow downstream, causing ischemia, tissue damage, infarction, heart attacks, strokes. And there's a vicious cycle here, too. Inflammation can trigger clotting, and clots themselves can cause local damage and inflammation.
So they feed each other, inflammation drives clots, clots drive inflammation?
Yes. It turns a protective mechanism into a chronic, destructive process, especially in the context of modern lifestyle factors that promote chronic inflammation.
What about tissue repair? How does that go wrong?
Repair fundamentally involves cell division and growth. If that process becomes dysregulated, if the stop signals fail, especially in the presence of mutations that promote growth, oncogenes, you get uncontrolled proliferation cancer, neoplasia. It's the repair mechanism running wild.
And the other side of bad repair is fibrosis.
Right. Sometimes the repair process overfocuses on laying down structural components, the extracellular matrix. Instead of regenerating functional tissue, you get excessive scar tissue fibrosis. Think of liver cirrhosis after chronic damage. The organ is repaired, but it's replaced functional cells with inert scar tissue, losing its function.
And you mentioned that interesting point about kids and scarring.
Yeah, the sources note that severe matrix-heavy scarring, the kind that leads to fibrosis, seems less common or absent in very young children.
Under 5.
Their repair mechanisms might be fundamentally different, perhaps less prone to this kind of maladaptive outcome. It highlights how these defense programs are complex and change over our lifespan.
Okay, let's shift to those mismatch diseases. Fuel reallocation seems like a prime example.
Absolutely. Our metabolism evolves systems to handle periods of scarcity. Storing fat efficiently, prioritizing glucose for the brain, these were crucial defenses against starvation or during high-demand states like infection or pregnancy. Now, many of us live with constant, easy access to calorie-dense food. That ancient system, designed for scarcity, is perpetually on in an environment of abundance. The result: chronic fat storage, insulin resistance, chronic low-grade inflammation, leading directly to the epidemic of type 2 diabetes. Our defense against famine makes us sick in times of plenty.
And a similar mismatch with salt and blood pressure.
Same story. We evolved incredibly efficient hormonal systems, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone, to hang on to sodium, because salt was often scarce in ancestral environment.
Vital electrolyte.
Crucial. But modern diets are often loaded with salt. Our bodies, still running the conserve salt at all costs program, struggle with this constant overload. The result is the kidneys retain more water to balance the salt, blood volume increases, and the cardiovascular system is put under constant high-pressure hypertension.
Our evolutionary past haunting our present health. Even basic avoidance behaviors can become pathological.
Yes. Take pathogen avoidance. We have innate mechanisms to detect cues associated with microbial danger, certain smells, tastes, signs of decay triggering disgust and avoidance. A cheap, effective first-line defense.
But when it goes too far?
It can manifest as obsessive-compulsive disorder, particularly the contamination washing subtype, germophobia. The normal adaptive avoidance behavior becomes exaggerated, intrusive, and debilitating.
And predator avoidance.
Same idea. Evolving in environments with predators meant developing wariness of open spaces, unfamiliar areas, places where threats might lurk. A sensible strategy on the savanna.
But in a modern city?
That same circuitry, if hyperactive or triggered inappropriately, can lead to agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces, crowds, situations where escape might be difficult. The ancient defense system misfiring in a contextually safe environment.
Okay, let's wrap this section by revisiting immunopathology. Symptoms are often defenses. What's the big problem for doctors trying to treat them?
The fundamental dilemma is, when do you suppress a defense? Fever, for instance. It makes you feel awful, but it demonstrably slows down many pathogens and enhances immune function. Suppressing the fever might make the patient feel better temporarily.
But could it prolong the illness or even worsen the outcome?
Exactly. You might be interfering with a crucial part of the body's fight. The same goes for anorexia, loss of appetite. During infection, it might starve the pathogen or conserve energy. Coughing clears airways. Diarrhea expels gut pathogens. These are costly, unpleasant defenses.
So treating the symptom might undermine the cure.
It can. The only time it's clearly safe to block a defensive symptom is if you're confident the cost of the defense itself is causing more harm than the original threat, or if the defense is clearly ineffective or spiraling out of control, like a cytokine storm. But often, the full picture, the hidden trade-offs the body is making, are obscure. It makes treating symptoms like fever a really tricky balancing act.
Okay, time to dive deep into the immune system itself. We need to separate the two main branches, the innate and the adaptive. Let's start with the innate system, the ancient generalist.
Right. The innate system is the first responder. It's incredibly fast, acting within minutes to hours. It's generalist because it doesn't target specific strains of pathogens, but rather broad classes. And its ancient versions of it exist in virtually all multicellular life, plants included.
And its genius lies in what it recognizes.
Exactly. It recognizes highly conserved molecular patterns, things like lipopolysaccharide, LPS, from bacterial cell walls, or peptidoglycans, or double-stranded RNA from viruses. These are essential structures the microbes cannot easily change without compromising their own survival.
So the innate system targets the unavoidable signatures of microbial life.
Precisely. It uses a set of germline-encoded receptors called pattern recognition receptors, or PRRs. Toll-like receptors, TLRs, are the famous ones to sense these patterns and identify the type of invader. Is it a bacterium, a virus, fungus, worm?
But once it detects something,
It unleashes its arsenal immediately. Physical barriers like skin and mucus are part of it. Then you have phagocytic cells, macrophages, and neutrophils that engulf and destroy microbes. There's the complement system, a cascade of blood proteins that coat pathogens, opsonization, making them easier targets for phagocytes or sometimes directly kill them. Natural killer NK cells target our own infected or cancerous cells. And antimicrobial peptides, like defensins, directly attack microbes.
a multi-pronged immediate attack.
Yes, and crucially, it coordinates a system-wide response. Activated innate cells release signaling molecules called cytokines. Key ones are IL-1, IL-6, TNF-alpha. These act like alarm bells throughout the body.
What do they trigger elsewhere?
They tell the liver to produce acute phase proteins like C-reactive protein, which help in defense. They signal the bone marrow to ramp up production and release more phagocytes. And they act on the hypothalamus in the brain to raise body temperature, causing fever.
So the innate system sounds the alarm and directs the initial response.
Yes, and perhaps its most critical role is to inform the next stage. Based on the type of pathogen it detects, the innate system sends signals that shape the response of the slower, more specific adaptive immune system.
Okay, let's move to the adaptive system. The precise learner, slower, more specific, has memory, Found only in vertebrates.
That's right, jawed vertebrates specifically. Its evolution involved a remarkable event, the integration of a jumping gene, a transposable element, carrying the genes RAG1 and RAG2.
RAG genes, what do they do?
They're essentially enzymes that cut and paste DNA. They mediate a process called somatic recombination, which happens only in developing lymphocytes, B and T cells. This process randomly shuffles gene segments that code for the antigen receptors, the antibodies on B cells, and the T cell receptors on T cells.
So instead of having a fixed set of receptors, we randomly generate millions, maybe billions of different ones in each individual.
Exactly. It's like creating a massive library of keys before you even know what locks you'll encounter. This immense, randomly generated diversity gives the adaptive system the potential flexibility to recognize almost any conceivable foreign molecule, even ones evolution has never seen before.
Incredible randomness at the heart of precision. How does the system then pick the right key for a specific infection?
That's the core concept, clonal selection. It works like natural selection, but operating on cells within your body.
Okay, walk us through the steps.
First step, generate diversity. As we said, RG-mediated recombination creates millions of unique B and T cells, each with a receptor for just one specific shape, antigen. They're naive, waiting for their target.
Second step, prevent self-reactivity. This is crucial. During development, mainly in the thymus for T cells and bone marrow for B cells, any lymphocyte whose randomly generated receptor happens to bind strongly to our own body's molecules, self-antigens, is instructed to die or is otherwise inactivated. This process, called negative selection, eliminates most potentially self-reactive cells, preventing autoimmunity, weeding out the potential traitors.
Right. Third step, activation. When a foreign antigen, say from a virus, enters the body, it circulates. Eventually, by chance, it encounters that one specific B cell or T cell out of millions whose receptor happens to be a perfect fit. Binding that antigen activates the lymphocyte.
Finding the needle in the haystack.
Precisely. And fourth step, expansion. Once activated, that single lymphocyte undergoes rapid cell division, creating a massive population, a clone of identical cells. All these daughter cells have the exact same receptor and are now armed effector cells ready to fight that specific antigen. The cells best suited to the threat are selected and amplified.
So the system finds the right weapon and then mass produces it.
That's the essence of it. And this whole process relies heavily on how antigens presented to T cells using MHC molecules.
Right, MHC class 1 and class 2. What's the difference?
MHC class 1 is found on almost all nucleated cells in your body. Its job is to constantly display little fragments of proteins being made inside that cell. If a cell is infected with a virus, it will inevitably display viral protein fragments on its MHC class 1. This acts like a flag saying, "I'm infected, kill me." It activates cytotoxic T cells, CD8+, to destroy the infected cell.
The internal surveillance system.
Yes. MHC class 2, on the other hand, is normally found only on specialized antigen-presenting cells, OPCs, like dendritic cells, macrophages, and B cells. These cells actively engulf material from outside themselves, like bacteria. They break it down and display the fragments on MHC class 2. This signals, "I've found an external threat," help coordinate the response. It primarily activates helper T cells, CD4+.
Reporting on the external environment. Got it. And the B cells make the antibodies, those Y-shaped proteins. What do they actually do?
Antibodies are incredibly versatile. Their variable tips, the top ends of the Y, bind specifically to the antigen. The constant region, the stem of the Y, determines the function. They have three main jobs.
Okay.
1. Neutralization. They can bind directly to viruses or bacterial toxins, physically blocking them from entering cells or carrying out their harmful effects. Gumming up the works.
2.
Opsonization. They coat the surface of pathogens. This coating acts like a tag, making the pathogen much more easily recognized and engulfed by phagocytic cells like macrophages, which have receptors for the antibody stems, making them pastier.
And 3.
Complement activation. Antibody binding, especially certain types, can trigger the complement cascade we mentioned earlier, leading to more opsonization and sometimes direct killing of the pathogen. They amplify the innate response.
And it's this whole adaptive process, clonal selection, antibody production, that generates immunological memory, right? That's why vaccines work.
Yeah, exactly. After an infection or vaccination, some of those expanded clones of B and T cells persist as long-lived memory cells. If you encounter the same pathogen again years later, these memory cells are already there, ready to activate much faster and more strongly than the first time. Vaccination essentially creates this memory without causing the full disease.
It's an incredibly complex and powerful system. But you said earlier, this flexibility is also its vulnerability.
It is. Think about it. The adaptive immune system, relies on random generation of receptors and positive feedback amplification, clonal expansion. That randomness means sometimes receptors targeting self aren't deleted properly, leading to autoimmunity. The amplification means allergic responses can spiral into dangerous anaphylaxis. It's very much like the nervous system in complex behavior. The flexibility to learn, adapt, and respond to novelty gives us huge advantages. But it also opens the door to specific diseases of complexity. Think severe anxiety disorders, phobias, paranoia in the behavioral realm, mirrored by autoimmunity and allergy in the immune realm. Simpler organisms with just innate systems don't really get these kinds of problems. Flexibility has a cost.
That's a powerful parallel. Okay, let's bring some of these threads together by looking at the overall strategies. Avoid, resist, or tolerate.
Right. These are the three fundamental ways an organism can deal with a threat, like a pathogen. Avoidance is the simplest and often cheapest. Just don't encounter the threat. Behavioral changes, staying away from sick individuals, physical barriers.
Makes sense. Resistance.
Resistance is about actively fighting to reduce or eliminate the pathogen load. This is the primary job of the immune system we just discussed, detecting, attacking, clearing the infection. It's effective when it works, but as we've seen, it's energetically expensive and often causes significant collateral damage, immunopathology. Plus, it puts strong selective pressure on the pathogen to evolve countermeasures, the classic arms race.
And tolerance is different.
Tolerance is about reducing the negative impact of a given level of infection on the host's fitness. It's not about killing the pathogen. It's about minimizing the harm the pathogen or the fight against it causes. Protecting tissues, repairing damage, managing inflammation. Because it doesn't directly attack the pathogen, it imposes much less selection pressure for pathogen evolution.
So tolerance is like managing the occupation rather than fighting an all-out war.
That's a decent analogy. And it's crucial for things like our gut microbiome, where we need to tolerate trillions of bacteria without mounting a constant destructive immune response.
The sources use graphs, reaction norms to show this.
Yeah, it's a helpful visual. Imagine plotting host fitness against pathogen burden. A highly resistant host aims to keep pathogen burden low, maximizing fitness that way. A highly tolerant host might have the same fitness as a less tolerant one at low pathogen levels, but as the burden increases, their fitness declines much more slowly. They have a shallower slope. They're better at maintaining function despite the infection.
Regardless of strategy, though, defenses always prioritize certain things.
Absolutely. Survival dictates priority. The brain, the heart, core respiratory and circulatory functions, these get preferential resource allocation during defense, which leads to that concept of immunoprivilege.
Right. Certain organs are shielded from the full force of the immune system.
Exactly. Places like the brain, the eyes, the testes. The potential collateral damage from a full-blown inflammatory response in these delicate vital tissues would be catastrophic. So they have mechanisms to limit immune cell entry and dampen inflammatory signaling.
It's a necessary compromise, trading some defensive power for organ integrity.
A critical compromise. You pay a price in terms of vulnerability to certain infections in those sites, but you avoid the self-destruction that excessive defense could cause.
Okay, we need to look at what happens when tolerance fails spectacularly. The 1918 flu pandemic is the chilling example here.
It truly is. The most shocking thing about the 1918 H1N1 pandemic was who died. It wasn't primarily the very young or very old, as usual with flu. There was this huge mortality spike in healthy young adults, people aged 20 to 40.
The ones you'd expect to have the strongest immune systems.
And that was precisely the problem. Their strong immune systems mounted an overwhelmingly aggressive resistance response to this novel virus, a massive cytokine storm.
So the defense itself killed them?
Largely, yes. The excessive inflammation filled their lungs with fluid and debris, causing acute respiratory distress syndrome. They effectively drowned in their own immune response. This massive damage also made them highly susceptible to deadly secondary bacterial pneumonias. It was a catastrophic failure of tolerance in the face of extreme resistance. The inability to manage the damage caused by the fight was lethal.
A devastating illustration of the cost of defense. But tolerance can be a successful long-term strategy, right? The SIV example.
Yes, the African green monkeys and simian immunodeficiency virus, SIV, the ancestor of HIV. These monkeys naturally carry high levels of SIV, similar viral loads to humans with untreated HIV.
But they don't get AIDS.
They don't. They've co-evolved with the virus. Their strategy isn't primarily resistance. They don't clear the virus. It's tolerance. They've evolved ways to limit the chronic immune activation and inflammation that SIV and HIV usually cause. They resolve the initial innate response quickly, maintain the integrity of their gut lining, a major site of damage in HIE, and generally avoid the bystander immunopathology.
So they manage the infection without destroying themselves in the process.
Exactly. They've settled into a relatively low-cost, managed coexistence. It's a powerful example showing that when resistance is futile or too costly, evolving robust tolerance mechanisms can be a highly successful alternative strategy.
Okay, wrapping this all up, this deep dive really forces a rethink. These defenses we rely on, they aren't perfect machines. They're fundamentally modifications of our basic physiology, designed for speed, power, using tools like positive feedback and randomness.
Which inherently builds in vulnerabilities. The high costs that evolution accepted for survival, the amplification mechanisms, the random receptor generation, these things inevitably lead to disease. Autoimmunity, allergies, shock, even cancer and heart disease can be seen, in part, as the dark side of defense.
Yeah.
We are built for propagating genes, not for a life free of suffering.
The cost of living is inseparable from the cost of defending that life.
It really is. And maybe the final thought to leave people with is about that very complexity. Our incredibly sophisticated adaptive systems, our immune system, but also our complex brains allowing adaptive behavior give us phenomenal flexibility to handle novelty. We can fight off new germs, learn new skills, adapt to new environments like no other species.
Yeah.
But that very flexibility seems to be what subjects us to uniquely complex diseases. Autoimmune disorders and severe allergies are rare in animals with only innate immunity. Similarly, debilitating anxiety disorders, paranoia, complex phobias, these seem to be potential failure modes of our highly adaptive but therefore vulnerable cognitive machinery. Is the price of our incredible adaptability these uniquely human or vertebrate forms of suffering?
Our greatest strength potentially enabling our most profound weaknesses. A really challenging thought. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.